Welcome. My name is Donald Sull. I'm a professor at London Business School. And today, in the third of our series on strategy and its discontents, we'll talk about how to put the notion of a strategy loop into practice in your own organization. So just to recap what we've talked about. In the first podcast, we talked about the linear view of strategy: plan, implement, sustain, and its fatal flaw, that it failed to incorporate new information. In the second podcast, we presented an alternative view of strategy as a loop that managers can go through in terms of making sense, making choices, making it happen, and making revisions. In this podcast, we'll talk about how you can make that happen in your own organizations. So there are many things that either help or hinder the strategic loop in practice. There's the information systems you have in place. There's the culture of the organization. There's the organizational structure, many things, of course. But what's interesting, one of the most important either obstacles or enablers of putting the strategic loop into practice is how good managers are at leading discussions in each of the four stages. And what I've found in working with a lot of companies and managers over the years is that most managers are good at one or two stages and either really bad or just avoid the other stages. So what I'd like to do is quickly talk through each of them. I'll give you a little flavor of what it takes to make it work, some of the common obstacle or two, and what you can do to address those. So let's start with making sense. The goal in this step is to observe data and come to a shared mental model of the situation, sufficient not for absolute truth, but to get through this iteration. So, what is the tone of the discussion you want to put into place? Well, it's a tone of open inquiry. It's characterized by a lot of questions, a lot of what ifs. It's not people shutting down the discussion. It's people opening up the discussion. What are some things that can go wrong here? Well, one of the killers is in very action-oriented organizations. Managers have a bias for action and they want to quickly cut down the discussion to make sense and jump to what we should do. How do you deal with that? Well, you can't in an action-oriented organization say, no, we can't talk about action. People will, that's how they're wired. What you can do, however, is when someone makes an action proposal, rather than taking it forward into how to implement it, take it backward. Ask questions like, what assumptions would have to be true for that to be a good way forward? Or, if that is the answer, what is the question? These kinds of questions can take an action plan backwards to surface assumptions about what's going on. Making choices. Here the objective is to come down to a small set of priorities that are agreed upon by folks, both on what to do and particularly on what not to do. The tone here is different. The tone here is about respectful argumentation. This is where folks are arguing their corner. They're saying, this really matters, this really matters. You need to be able to argue at this point, and argue in a respectful and productive way. Now, how can this go wrong? One of the most common ways it goes wrong is when a group talks and talks and talks around in circles without ever coming to a choice. Right? Just talk, 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 and never make choices. One of the most powerful ways to address this is to agree as a group up front what rules we'll use to break ties when we cannot come to a consensus. It's what Professor Kathy Eisenhart of Stanford calls qualified consensus. So what might be some rules? One, if we can't reach a consensus in the desired time, we take a vote, or the boss decides, or whoever feels strongest decides, or the functional head decides. The nature of the rules isn't so important as having rules to get past this cul-de-sac. Third, making it happen. That's primarily about getting good promises from people and making sure they deliver. The tone here is about supportive discipline. As a manager, you need to hold people accountable for what they've promised, but on the other hand, you have to support them and help them in achieving what they've promised. Now, these, like the other conversations, can go wrong in many ways. One of the common ones is when deals are made, promises are made in smoke-filled rooms in private, and no one really feels compelled to honor them because there's no monitoring. One way that a lot of organizations have dealt with this is have public monitoring of commitments. So people will actually, in Ambev, for instance, half of the largest brewer in the world, managers work in an open office environment where behind their desk sits their 5 key promises and how they're doing in red, yellow, and green. Finally, making revisions, a discussion that most organizations struggle with. The objective here is to, one, note anomalies things that don't fit with our point of view. Not things that confirm our point of view, those are easy, but things that don't fit with our point of view, and then revise our assumptions based on that. The tone of this kind of discussion, it has to be dispassionate analysis, like a scientist exploring the results of an experiment, rather than a school marm looking for somebody to blame. Otherwise it can degenerate into a blame game too easily. What are some of the ways this goes wrong? Well, one of the most common ways this goes wrong is that people search out information that confirms what they want to believe, rather than searching out information that disconfirms it. And one way to deal with that is to bring in outsiders into the revision process who are less emotionally bound to this, who may be better positioned to note disconfirming information. So, it's not easy to move from a linear view of strategy to a loop view of strategy, but the payoff is enormous, and there are many companies that have done it. So, I wish you the best of luck in doing it in your own organization. Thank you.